It was a bright Tuesday morning when Marcus Jenkins walked into the shiny, sleek car dealership, expecting nothing more than a routine visit. He had been browsing online for weeks, looking for the perfect car to replace his old one. Marcus, a young black man with sharp features and a quiet confidence, wasn't there for a test drive or some casual window shopping. He was there to buy a luxury car, his new car. He didn't know it yet, but today would be the day his life took a turn. Marcus had saved for this moment for years. He'd worked tirelessly at his job as a software developer in downtown Chicago, quietly building up his savings, quietly planning for the moment when he could walk into a dealership and choose whatever car he wanted. The time had finally come. As he stepped through the front doors, he felt a sense of accomplishment and a slight hint of nervousness. He was about to make a big purchase, something he had earned through hard work. The dealership was bustling with activity. Salespeople moved around the showroom floor, talking to customers and discussing deals. The glass windows made everything seem bright and inviting. The polished floors reflected the shiny, expensive cars parked inside. It was everything Marcus had imagined. He was ready. He had done his research and knew exactly which car he wanted. But before he could approach any of the salespeople, the manager, a middle-aged man named Alan Mitchell, spotted him. Alan had been working at the dealership for over 15 years, and in all that time he had developed a knack for reading people. He had a reputation for being blunt and straightforward, but his experience told him that Marcus wasn't the type to just walk in and make a purchase, not someone who looked like him. Alan, without giving Marcus a chance to even step closer, raised his hand and called over one of the salespeople. He didn't even bother to look at Marcus directly. He'd assumed this was just another tire kicker, a person who came in with no intention to buy, just wasting time. Alan had seen it all before. "Hey, Jim," Alan called to one of the younger salespeople. "Can you help this guy out? He's probably just browsing. Make sure he doesn't waste your time." Jim, who was younger and still trying to learn the ropes, nodded. He had heard Alan's words but didn't think much of it at first. Jim looked over at Marcus, a little awkward, and greeted him with a forced smile. But before he could speak, Alan cut in again. No. Jim, you don't need to waste time with him. Just show him the door," Alan ordered, his tone casual, like it was no big deal. Marcus was stunned. His mouth went dry, and his heart skipped a beat. He hadn't even said a word to the man yet, and already he was being dismissed, rejected, like he didn't belong there. He stood there frozen, unsure of what to do next. Alan didn't see Marcus as a potential customer. To him, Marcus didn't fit the usual profile of someone who could afford the cars in the showroom. The fact that Marcus was black seemed to trigger some internal bias in Alan. He made assumptions that turned out to be completely wrong. Without even realizing it, Alan had treated Marcus like he didn't deserve to be there, didn't belong. Jim hesitated, looking back at Alan, unsure whether to follow through with the order. But before he could decide, Marcus spoke up. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, his voice steady but clearly irritated. "I'm here to buy a car, not to waste anyone's time." Alan, without even turning around, let out a dismissive laugh. "Yeah, sure you are," he said. "Listen, buddy, I don't have time to deal with people who aren't serious. You'd better go somewhere else if you're not ready to make a real purchase." The words hit Marcus like a slap in the face. His first instinct was to leave, to walk out of the dealership and find somewhere else to go. But then something clicked inside of him. He had worked too hard for this moment. He wasn't going to let someone like Alan run him off. Not today. Before he could say anything more, the unexpected happened. "Actually, I'm serious about buying a car," Marcus said. His voice was calm but firm. "In fact, I'm the new owner of this dealership." The room went silent. Alan, still standing at the counter, froze. He hadn't heard Marcus correctly. His head snapped around to face him, but his eyes narrowed in disbelief. His lips parted slightly as if to speak, but no words came out. Marcus wasn't finished. "You heard me right," he continued. "I'm the one who just bought this dealership. So if you want to keep your job, I suggest you start treating customers with respect." The shock on Alan's face was immediate. His hands shook slightly, and his face went pale. For a moment he couldn't process what was happening. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Jim, standing beside Marcus, looked back and forth between the two, trying to figure out if this was some kind of joke. Alan finally stammered, You're the owner?" His voice was trembling now, the harshness from earlier completely gone. Marcus didn't answer directly. Instead, he glanced at the manager with a look that made it clear he was no longer a regular customer. He was the boss now, and Alan, despite his years of experience, had made a huge mistake. Before Alan could recover from his shock, Marcus turned and walked toward the back office. "I'll be in my office. You'll want to clean up your act before I get back," he said without looking over his shoulder. Alan stood there, motionless, his mind racing. He had just kicked out the new owner of the dealership without even realizing it. What was going to happen now? What would Marcus do? Alan had no idea. But the tension in the air was palpable. Everyone could feel it. Marcus was in control now, and no one knew what would happen next. The silence in the showroom stretched out long after Marcus walked into the back office. Alan was still standing by the counter, his face pale and his hands shaking slightly. Jim, the young salesperson, exchanged an awkward glance with his manager before nervously moving toward the door to the back office. He didn't know what to do, had never seen Alan this rattled before. He had always been the one who controlled everything, who ran the show. Now, Jim wondered if he had just witnessed the end of that. Alan," Jim began, his voice faltering. What just happened?" Alan barely seemed to hear him. He was staring at the door Marcus had just walked through, his mind spinning. There was a burning sensation in his stomach, the kind of feeling you get when you know you've made a huge mistake, but can't figure out exactly how to fix it. "What did he say?" Alan finally asked, his voice quieter than usual, almost too soft for a man who'd spent his career commanding attention. "He said he's the new owner," Jim repeated, unsure how to react. "Is he serious?" Alan ran a hand through his thinning hair, trying to shake the shock off. I don't know," he muttered. This is bad, Jim. This is really bad." Jim didn't know what else to say, so he stayed quiet. He had seen Alan dismiss customers before, but something told him that Marcus wasn't someone who could be dismissed so easily. He was probably right about the car being his, and judging by the way Alan was acting, Marcus had every right to be upset. Meanwhile, in the back office, Marcus sat behind the desk, leaning back in the ergonomic chair, his hands steepled in front of him. The room was quiet, except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the faint noise of cars passing outside. Marcus was calm, too calm. He'd been preparing for this moment for years of hard work, years of putting in the hours, of making smart investments, and learning the ins and outs of the business world. But nothing could have prepared him for how it felt to walk into this dealership, a place he'd once walked into as a potential customer, only to be dismissed the way Alan had treated him. His phone buzzed on the desk, interrupting his thoughts. It was a text from his lawyer, Karen Miller. "Just got confirmation that everything is in place. Ownership transfer is complete. The dealership is officially yours." Marcus stared at the message for a moment. This was it. This was the culmination of everything he had worked for. He had outsmarted the system. He had bought the dealership, a luxury car dealership that was one of the biggest in the city. But no one in the dealership had any idea who he was. He had wanted it to be a surprise, to see if they would treat him differently once they realized the truth. He hadn't expected to walk in and be treated like he didn't belong. His phone buzzed again, and this time it was a call from Karen. "Hey, Marcus," Karen said when he answered. "Everything's all set. I'm sure you're still in shock. But I just wanted to let you know that your lawyer has finalized everything. The dealership is officially yours. I'll be there later this afternoon to go over the final paperwork. But for now, I'd suggest you take control and start making decisions. You've got the power now." Marcus smiled. "Thanks, Karen. I appreciate it. I think I've already started taking control." As he said this, He glanced over at the door to the showroom, still half expecting Alan or someone else to walk in and apologize. But no one came. Karen's voice pulled him back to the conversation. "Good. I'll be there soon, but remember, you need to be firm. There's no room for weakness in this industry, and you need to make sure everyone knows who's in charge now. If Alan or anyone else tries to challenge you, don't hesitate to take action. This is your dealership now." Marcus nodded. "I'll do that, Karen. I've got this under control." After hanging up, Marcus stood up from the desk and walked out of the office. He wasn't sure what exactly he was going to do next, but he knew that things needed to change, fast. He wasn't about to let someone like Alan dismiss him, treat him like a second-class citizen just because of the color of his skin. He stepped back into the showroom, where Jim was standing awkwardly by the door, waiting for Marcus to come out. The atmosphere was tense, but now there was an air of expectation. People in the dealership knew something was happening, but they weren't sure what. Marcus could see the suspicion in their eyes. They were probably wondering if he was really the new owner, or if he was just another person with a dream who didn't belong. Alan was nowhere to be seen. "Jim," Marcus said, his voice calm but authoritative. "Where's Alan?" Jim shuffled his feet, unsure of what to say. I think he's in the break room, but he's been acting strange. I think he's in shock or something. I don't know what happened back there, but he looks rattled." Marcus nodded, his mind made up. "I'm going to talk to him." As he walked toward the break room, he could feel the eyes of the salespeople following him, some of them whispering among themselves. But Marcus wasn't concerned with their curiosity. He had a job to do. Alan needed to understand that this was Marcus's dealership now. There was no going back. When Marcus reached the break room, he found Alan sitting at a small table, head in his hands, clearly flustered. His usual confidence had evaporated. When he looked up and saw Marcus standing in the doorway, his face turned a shade lighter, as if the reality of the situation was sinking in. Marcus," Alan stammered, trying to compose himself. "Look, I didn't know. I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean to what?" Marcus interrupted, stepping into the room. "You didn't mean to kick out your new boss? You didn't mean to treat me like I don't belong here?" Alan swallowed hard. He looked like he might say something else, but the words caught in his throat. He had no defense, no excuse. The damage was done. "I'm sorry, Marcus," he finally said, his voice small. I messed up. I've been doing this for so long, and I just assumed. I didn't think." Marcus let out a deep breath. This was it. The first test of his new role as owner. He could let this slide, pretend that Alan's apology was enough. But something told him that this was bigger than that. It wasn't just about Alan's mistake. It was about showing everyone in the dealership that things were going to be different from now on. "You're going to have to do a lot more than apologize, Alan," Marcus said. "I'm giving you a chance to make things right. But you need to understand something. Respect isn't optional here. It's required. If you can't get that, then I'll have to make some changes." Alan nodded quickly, his face flushed with embarrassment. "I understand, Marcus. I swear I didn't mean to offend you. It won't happen again." Marcus didn't respond right away. Instead, he stood in the doorway, his mind racing. Alan's future in this dealership was now in his hands. What should he do next? Would he give Alan another chance, or was it time to make a bigger statement to everyone else in the showroom? Before he could make his decision, the phone on his desk rang, breaking the silence. He picked it up. "Marcus," Karen's voice came through the line. "It's time. You've got a meeting with the board in 30 minutes. You need to come to the conference room right away." Marcus sighed. He had bigger things to focus on now. Alan's fate and the fate of the dealership were about to be decided in the next chapter of this story. He gave Alan one last look and turned to leave. Marcus's steps were firm as he walked back into the showroom, his mind racing. The conversation with Alan had been just the beginning. As new owner of the dealership, he had a lot to prove, not just to Alan but to everyone who worked there, and everyone who walked through the doors. He couldn't afford to let the first misstep go unaddressed. If he did, It would be a signal that he wasn't serious. But at the same time, he didn't want to act impulsively. He needed to be smart about this. The showroom, which had seemed so bright and inviting when Marcus first walked in, now felt cold and tense. The employees were scattered around, whispering quietly, casting nervous glances in Marcus's direction. Their eyes followed him as he crossed the floor to the back offices, where Karen had told him the meeting was set to begin. The boardroom was just down the hall, a glass-walled room with a long, polished wooden table and chairs arranged neatly around it. As Marcus pushed the door open, he saw the familiar faces of the dealership's upper management. A few senior salespeople, the head of service, and the finance manager. They'd all turned their heads as Marcus entered, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "Marcus," said one of the older men, Bob Stewart, the finance manager. He gave Marcus a polite, but somewhat cold nod. "Glad you could join us. I imagine you're eager to get down to business." Marcus nodded, sitting at the head of the table. "Absolutely," he said, his voice steady. "Let's make this quick. I've got a lot of work to do." The meeting kicked off with a discussion about the financials of the dealership, but Marcus barely paid attention. He already knew most of the numbers. The dealership was doing well, but there were a few areas that could be improved. Marcus wanted to make sure his new business was profitable. But that wasn't what was on his mind at the moment. What was bothering him was the way Alan had treated him. How could a manager, someone in a position of responsibility, have dismissed him so quickly? "Mr. Jenkins," Bob Stewart spoke again, interrupting Marcus's thoughts. "We need your decision on the marketing strategy for the upcoming quarter. The sales have been stagnating, and we want to boost numbers. We're recommending a new campaign to attract more high-end buyers." Marcus looked around at the group, all eyes on him. He had expected questions, but he hadn't expected them to be so direct, so eager to move on from the incident with Alan. It was as if they were pretending nothing had happened. Maybe they didn't know what had gone on earlier, but Marcus wasn't going to let them ignore the elephant in the room. "I'll need to think about that," Marcus said, trying to keep his tone neutral. "But before we discuss marketing, I need to address something important." The room fell silent as Marcus leaned forward, locking eyes with each person in the room. He could see the unease in their faces. They were expecting something, but not this. "I was just in the showroom," he continued, "and I was treated like I don't belong here. One of your managers, Alan, tried to throw me out without even asking me who I was." A few people looked uncomfortable. Bob Stewart cleared his throat and tried to downplay the situation. "Well, Marcus, I'm sure that was just a misunderstanding. Alan's been with us a long time. Maybe he didn't recognize you as the new owner, but—" Marcus held up a hand, silencing Bob. "I'm not here for excuses," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I don't care if Alan has been here for 20 years. You all need to understand that things are going to be different now. If anyone here has any doubts about how I run this business, you need to speak up now." A heavy silence hung in the air. The other managers exchanged uneasy glances. No one said anything for a long moment. "Look," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair. "I'm not here to tear the place apart. I know it's a tough job running a dealership. But if anyone here thinks they can disrespect a customer or an employee based on assumptions or prejudice, then they don't belong here." Bob Stewart's face flushed slightly, but he kept his voice steady. "Marcus, you're right. That's not how we do business here. I'm sure Alan didn't mean any harm. I'll make sure he understands the seriousness of the situation. We'll handle it." Marcus gave him a long look before nodding. "See that you do. I won't tolerate this kind of behavior from anyone. Not from Alan, not from anyone in this building." The tension in the room seemed to lift slightly, but only just. Marcus could tell they were still processing what had just happened. They hadn't expected him to come in and make such an immediate impact. He could feel their respect growing, but there was something else behind their eyes, doubt maybe or disbelief that things were changing so quickly. But he didn't care. It was his time to take control, and he was going to do it. After a few more moments of uncomfortable silence, Bob cleared his throat again and shifted the conversation back to the business at hand. The rest of the meeting went by in a blur of numbers and proposals. But Marcus was no longer paying much attention. His mind was still on Alan, on what needed to happen next. The meeting finally wrapped up and the other managers filed out one by one, their faces still tense. As the last person left, Marcus sat alone at the table, thinking about what to do next. His phone buzzed again, and he looked down at the screen. It was a message from Karen. "I spoke with Alan. He seems to have taken the hint, but be careful. He's not the only one who might not be happy with the changes. You'll have resistance from others. Don't underestimate them." Marcus's lips curled into a small smile. Karen was right. Alan was just one part of the puzzle. He had to be prepared for more opposition. But he was ready. He had already made his decision. It was time to meet with Alan again. When Marcus returned to the showroom, Alan was waiting for him, standing by one of the cars near the front of the lot. His posture was slumped, his hands in his pockets. He didn't look like the confident manager he had been earlier that day. "Marcus," Alan said, his voice low. "Look, I owe you an apology. I didn't mean for things to go down like that. I let my own assumptions cloud my judgment. I've worked here for years, and I should have known better." Marcus stood still, studying Alan for a moment. He had been waiting for this, waiting for Alan to take responsibility. But was it enough? Would this apology be enough to keep Alan in his position, or was it time for a change? "Alan," Marcus said, his voice calm but decisive, "I appreciate your apology. But you have to understand that actions speak louder than words. You've been in this business long enough to know better. I don't expect this to happen again." Alan nodded vigorously, looking almost relieved. "It won't. I promise. I've learned my lesson." Marcus paused. Then, after a long breath, he spoke again. "I'm giving you one more chance, Alan," he said. "But remember, this is your final warning. One more slip-up, and you're out." Alan's face brightened with gratitude. "Thank you, Marcus. Thank you for giving me another shot." But as Marcus walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wouldn't be the last challenge he would face. Alan wasn't the only one who would test him. There were others in the dealership who were watching closely, and Marcus knew they were waiting for him to slip. But he wasn't going to slip. He was going to rise. The days that followed were a whirlwind of decisions, meetings, and constant adjustments. Marcus had officially taken control of the dealership, but despite the power he now held, he couldn't ignore the growing tension that lingered in the air. It wasn't just the employees who were watching him closely. It was the customers, too. They could sense something was different, even if they didn't know exactly what it was. Some welcomed the change, intrigued by the new ownership, while others were skeptical, unsure whether the dealership's new direction would affect their experience. Marcus knew he had to tread carefully. The mistakes made by Alan weren't just about bad customer service. They were a signal that the old management structure wasn't equipped for the changes he planned to make. If he was going to turn this dealership into something more, something better, he had to ensure that every person in the building understood that he was in charge, especially the ones who had been there the longest. He spent the next few days meeting with every department head, one by one, hearing their concerns, asking for their input, but also making it clear that he wasn't here to let anyone coast. It wasn't about making friends, it was about results. But as he sat in his office one afternoon, reviewing the latest sales reports, the door to his office opened, and Alan stepped inside. His posture was more straight than it had been earlier, but his face still wore an uneasy expression. "Marcus," Alan began, his voice softer than usual. "I know things have been a bit tense, but I wanted to talk to you about the sales floor. I've been thinking about how we can turn things around and make some real changes." Marcus put down the report and leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "I'm listening," he said. Alan hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I think we need to shake things up a little. Not just with the cars we're selling, but with the way we approach customers. The showroom feels old-fashioned. We need a new strategy, new promotions, fresh ideas." Marcus raised an eyebrow. It wasn't the first time someone had suggested changes to the sales strategy, But hearing it come from Alan after everything that had happened made Marcus wary. "I agree," Marcus said slowly. "But I don't just want ideas. I want you to put something concrete together, something we can test in the next couple of weeks. If it works, we'll roll it out across the dealership." Alan's face lit up with a small smile, grateful for the chance to redeem himself. "I can do that. I'll work on it right away." Marcus nodded, but as Alan left his office, Marcus couldn't help but wonder if Alan was truly ready to lead the floor again. Despite the apology and the chance Marcus had given him, something about Alan still felt off, like he wasn't fully committed to the changes Marcus wanted to make. As the day wore on, Marcus's mind kept returning to the same question. Was Alan really on his side? Or was he still trying to hold on to the old ways of running the dealership, the same ways that had almost cost Marcus everything? The next few days were filled with constant changes. Marcus had fired off emails to the entire staff, outlining new expectations and new standards for customer service, which Alan had to pass along. He'd instructed Karen to update the marketing materials and add more inclusive language to appeal to a broader customer base. The tension was still there, but now it was accompanied by a sense of anticipation. People were waiting to see what Marcus would do next. Then one afternoon, the storm hit. It started small, almost too small to notice at first. A complaint came through the customer service desk, nothing unusual. But when it was followed by more complaints, all centered around one issue, Marcus's heart sank. Every complaint came from the same source, Alan's sales team. It seemed that the old manager was already starting to undermine Marcus's authority again, either deliberately or out of habit. Customers were complaining about being overcharged, about receiving poor customer service, and most tellingly, about Alan himself. Some even mentioned that Alan had tried to pressure them into unnecessary add-ons, things they hadn't asked for. It was a pattern, one that Marcus knew he couldn't ignore. He picked up the phone and called Karen. "I need a meeting with you and Bob Stewart in the next hour," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. "This can't go on any longer." Within the hour, Karen and Bob arrived at Marcus's office. He quickly filled them in on the situation, showing them the stack of customer complaints that had piled up over the past few days. "This isn't just bad service," Marcus said, his voice low. "This is a pattern of behavior that could hurt the dealership. Alan is undermining me, and he's doing it in front of customers. We can't let this go on." Bob Stewart frowned, looking through the complaints. "I'm not sure I understand," he said. "You gave Alan a second chance. Are you saying he's back to his old ways already?" Marcus nodded. "Exactly. This is no longer about giving him another chance. It's about what's best for the business. If I allow this to continue, I risk losing credibility with the entire team. And the customers won't forget it either." Karen crossed her arms and leaned against the wall, her face serious. "So what are you planning to do about it?" Marcus took a deep breath. He had tried to be patient. He had given Alan the benefit of the doubt. But the time had come for a more decisive approach. "I'm going to confront Alan," Marcus said, "and I'll give him one more chance to prove himself. If he doesn't make it right, if he continues to act like this, he's out." The room fell silent. Bob looked at Marcus, and for a moment, Marcus could see a flicker of doubt in his eyes. It was obvious that Bob wasn't convinced. Alan had been with the dealership for years, and there was an unspoken loyalty that many of the staff members had towards him. But Marcus wasn't worried about loyalty. He was worried about the future of the dealership. If Alan wasn't willing to adapt, to get on board with the changes, then he had no place in Marcus's new vision. "I'm going to give him one last shot," Marcus repeated. "But this time, I won't be lenient." Karen nodded. "I think that's the right move. You can't let him drag you down." Marcus stood up from his desk, a sense of finality settling over him. "I'll handle it from here." As he left his office, his steps were purposeful. The showroom floor was quieter than usual. The employees were scattered, either working with customers or standing around waiting for something to happen. Alan was nowhere in sight, but Marcus wasn't surprised. He would be in the back office, no doubt trying to avoid confrontation. Marcus found Alan sitting alone, looking at his phone. He didn't look up when Marcus entered. "Alan," Marcus said, his voice sharp. Alan looked up slowly, his face pale. "Marcus, Don't." Marcus cut him off. "I've seen the complaints. The customers are upset, and it's because of you. I'm giving you one last chance. Fix this, or you're gone." Alan's mouth opened, but no words came out. For a long moment he just stared at Marcus, the weight of the situation finally sinking in. The confidence that had once defined him was gone, replaced by something closer to fear. "Do you understand what I'm saying, Alan?" Marcus asked, his voice hard. Alan nodded, his throat tight. "Yes, Marcus, I understand." Marcus gave him one last look before turning and walking out of the office. He didn't look back. Alan's future was in his hands, and Marcus wasn't about to let this dealership slip through his fingers. It was now or never. The next day, Marcus walked into the dealership feeling the weight of his decision. He'd given Alan a second chance, but his patience was running thin. The truth was, Marcus had hoped for more. Hoped that Alan would prove he could rise to the occasion and show real leadership. Instead, the complaints had piled up. He knew this was a make-or-break moment, not just for Alan but for the dealership as a whole. If things didn't turn around soon, Marcus would have to take action. As he made his way to the showroom, he could feel the eyes on him. The employees, sensing the tension in the air, were quieter than usual. They were waiting, unsure of what would happen next. Some looked nervous, while others seemed resigned, as if they had already picked sides in a battle they didn't fully understand. But Marcus wasn't concerned with them right now. His focus was squarely on Alan. Alan was nowhere to be seen when Marcus entered the showroom, but he knew exactly where to find him. The manager's office was just down the hallway, tucked away behind a glass partition. Marcus walked with purpose, his steps echoing in the otherwise quiet dealership. As he reached the office, he saw Alan sitting behind his desk, his head lowered, scribbling something on a piece of paper. When Alan noticed Marcus in the doorway, his expression shifted, but it wasn't the confident, self-assured look of a manager. Instead, Alan looked almost defeated. "Marcus," Alan said, looking up, his voice low, "I wanted to talk to you about yesterday. About the complaints." Marcus didn't answer immediately. He crossed the threshold into the office, standing still for a moment. He could sense the guilt in Alan's posture, the way he fidgeted with the pen in his hand. It was almost like the weight of the previous days had finally hit him. But Marcus had no time for second-guessing. The situation had escalated too quickly for him to allow more mistakes. "Alan," Marcus said, his tone firm, "I gave you a chance to fix this. But now it's clear that nothing has changed. The complaints keep coming in, and they're all about you." Alan opened his mouth, but Marcus held up his hand, silencing him before he could speak. "I don't want excuses. I want results. I've been patient, but the customers aren't. They don't care about your history with the dealership. They care about how they're treated. And right now, they're not being treated right." Alan looked down at the desk, his face flushed with shame. He opened his mouth again, but Marcus interrupted him. "You've been here for years, Alan. You know what this place is about. You know how to treat customers and close deals. But I'm not going to let you undermine everything we're trying to build. The culture here needs to change. And if you're not willing to change with it, I can't keep you around." Alan's eyes widened, and for a moment, Marcus thought he might speak up, argue, or make a plea. But instead, he just nodded, his face hardening with resignation. "I get it, Marcus," Alan said quietly. "I've messed up. I won't make excuses. I'll fix it." Marcus studied him for a moment, searching for any sign that Alan truly understood the gravity of the situation. Alan was a seasoned manager, but Marcus knew that experience wasn't enough if the mindset wasn't right. This was more than just about making sales. It was about the atmosphere, the way customers felt when they walked into the showroom. The whole dealership needed to reflect the new vision he had, and that vision didn't include anyone who couldn't keep up. "Listen, Alan," Marcus said, his voice softening slightly. "You have one more shot. But you need to prove to me and to the rest of the staff that you can turn things around. If not, I'll have to let you go. It's that simple." Alan nodded again, his expression a mixture of shame and determination. "I understand. And I won't let you down, Marcus. I'll prove it to you." With that, Marcus left the office, but his mind was still turning. He wasn't sure whether Alan was truly capable of the change he promised. People could say the right things, apologize, and vow to do better, but words weren't enough in business. Marcus needed to see action. If Alan didn't deliver, Marcus would have no choice but to cut ties with him. Marcus knew that if things didn't improve soon, there would be more difficult decisions to make. But he wasn't backing down. The dealership was his now, and he was going to do whatever it took to make it succeed. The rest of the day passed without incident. Alan seemed more subdued, more focused, but there was still a lingering doubt in Marcus's mind. He had no patience for delays or excuses. This was business, and he wasn't going to let anyone drag him down. That evening, as Marcus was preparing to leave the dealership, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Karen. "I've been hearing some things. Alan's team is still not on board with the changes. Some of the other managers are rumbling too. You need to act fast before this gets out of hand." Marcus stared at the message for a long moment. His instincts had been right. It wasn't just Alan. It was the whole team. The resistance was growing, and if he didn't do something about it soon, he might lose control of the dealership altogether. He sat back in his chair, running his hand over his face. There was no more room for compromise. The next step had to be bold, decisive, and uncompromising. It was time to make the hard call. The following morning, Marcus arrived early at the dealership. He knew he couldn't wait any longer. The resistance from Alan and his team was only going to escalate if he didn't take charge now. As he walked into the showroom, the staff seemed to be on edge, glancing at him nervously. They knew something was coming, but they weren't sure what. Alan, who had been quiet in the past few days, was standing near the front, talking to a few salespeople. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw Marcus approaching. "Morning, Marcus," Alan said, his voice stiff, as if waiting for a reprimand. Marcus didn't respond immediately. He walked past Alan, heading straight for the center of the showroom where everyone could see him. He paused, taking in the faces of the staff, some eager, others uncertain. They were all waiting to hear what he would say. He didn't waste any time. "I've been hearing a lot of complaints," Marcus said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Complaints from customers, complaints from employees, and I won't tolerate it any longer. This dealership is changing, and anyone who can't adapt will be shown the door." He paused, scanning the room. The tension was palpable, everyone holding their breath. "I'm not here to play games," Marcus continued, his tone hard. "We're a team, and we'll either rise together or fail together. But make no mistake, if you're not committed to this vision, you're out." Alan shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't say anything. "Starting today, there will be a zero-tolerance policy for anything less than the highest standards of customer service. If you can't meet those standards, I'll find someone who can." Marcus turned and looked directly at Alan. "You've got one more chance to show me that you can lead this team. You've been here long enough to know what's at stake. If you can't prove that you've got what it takes, then you won't just lose your position, you'll lose your job." Alan swallowed hard but nodded. His eyes were wide, and for the first time in days, Marcus saw a flicker of real fear in his gaze. Marcus wasn't done yet. "Now let's get to work." He turned and walked away, leaving the showroom to go back to his office. As he did, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of uncertainty. He had made his stance clear, but there was something gnawing at him. Could Alan really change? Would the rest of the team follow his lead, or would this push send them running for the door? Marcus didn't know the answer, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't about to back down. The battle for the future of the dealership was only just beginning. The morning after Marcus's ultimatum felt like a pressure cooker about to explode. The dealership was quieter than usual, the calm before the storm. No one seemed willing to speak openly, but Marcus could feel their eyes on him. He knew they were watching, waiting to see what would happen next. Would Alan rise to the challenge, or would the rebellion within the team continue to fester, turning the entire place into a battleground? Marcus walked into the showroom early as usual, his steps echoing through the empty space. He could hear the hum of fluorescent lights above him, the sound of tires rolling gently on the polished floor. It was almost peaceful, but he knew it wouldn't last long. The tension in the air was thick, and it was only a matter of time before things either broke or began to heal. He had made it clear the day before. Either the staff would buy into the changes, or they wouldn't be part of the dealership anymore. His patience had worn thin. For months he tried to be diplomatic, to ease into the changes slowly. But now the gloves were off. He needed results, and he needed them fast. Alan's absence was noticeable. Normally, Alan would be bustling around, checking on salespeople, closing deals, barking orders. Today, though, he was nowhere to be found. Marcus assumed he was either trying to regroup or hiding from the inevitable confrontation. Either way, Marcus wasn't going to let him get comfortable. He pulled out his phone and texted Karen, asking her to meet him in his office. Within minutes, she appeared, her usual sharp expression replaced with a look of uncertainty. "Morning," Marcus said, motioning for her to sit. She sat down slowly, folding her arms across her chest. "What's the next move?" she asked, her voice low. "I'm giving Alan one last chance," Marcus said. "I'm not going to fire him right now. But I want to see results today. If I don't, we'll need to make some hard decisions." Karen nodded. "Understood. But you're not the only one who's having issues with him. I've had a few managers come to me privately, talking about the atmosphere he's creating on the sales floor. He's not exactly receptive to change." "That's what I'm worried about," Marcus said. "The longer this goes on, the more it spreads. If the team's not behind me, then we're all sunk. We need to act quickly before this gets out of hand. I'll keep an eye on things and report back to you. But Marcus, you might need to make your decisions sooner rather than later. The staff is starting to take sides." Marcus sighed, rubbing his temples. "I know. I don't want to lose good people because of one guy. But if I don't act now, it could be too late. We've got a new vision here, and if anyone doesn't see that, they're going to be left behind." Karen gave him a nod of agreement before standing up. "I'll check in with the other managers, and I'll stay on top of Alan's team. We'll figure this out." Marcus watched her leave the office, feeling a strange mix of unease and determination. He was used to making tough decisions. But this felt different. He wasn't just managing a business anymore. He was dealing with egos, loyalties, and the delicate balance of leadership. Every decision felt like it could tip the scale in the wrong direction. The morning dragged on, and still there was no sign of Alan. Marcus couldn't help but wonder if Alan was actively avoiding him or if he was simply too afraid to face the music. Either way, Marcus knew he couldn't wait forever. He had to get to the bottom of it. Finally, around noon, Alan appeared in the showroom, looking tense and out of place. His eyes darted around as he made his way to the sales desk, but he didn't approach Marcus right away. Marcus knew Alan was stalling, but he wasn't going to let him get away with it. He walked up to Alan, who straightened slightly when he saw Marcus approaching. "Alan," Marcus said, keeping his voice even, "we need to talk." Alan nodded quickly, his lips pressed into a thin line. "I know, Marcus. I know things have been rough. I've been thinking about it all morning and want to make things right." Marcus studied him for a moment, not sure whether to believe him. Alan had said the right things before, but Marcus wasn't fooled by empty promises. He needed action. "Show me," Marcus said bluntly. "Show me that you can lead. I've given you a chance to prove yourself, but I can't do this alone. I need you to step up and get your team in line. The customers expect better, and so do I." Alan hesitated, his hands fidgeting at his sides. For a moment, Marcus thought he might break down, but Alan took a deep breath, his expression hardening. "You'll see, Marcus," Alan said. "I'll fix it. I swear. Just give me a little more time." Marcus looked at him, his patience wearing thin. I don't have time, Alan. This isn't a slow process. The dealership is my responsibility now. I'm not going to watch it sink because you're dragging your feet. Alan nodded, his jaw clenched. I get it. I'll make it right. You won't regret this. Marcus didn't respond. He turned and walked away, heading back to his office. But as he passed through the showroom, he could feel the eyes on him. He knew the staff was watching. They were waiting for the next move to see if Alan would rise to the occasion or if this would all end in disaster. The rest of the afternoon passed in tense silence. Alan appeared more engaged, moving from salesperson to salesperson, offering guidance and advice. It seemed like he was trying, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that it was all just a show. The actions didn't match the words. Alan was still the same manager who had let the dealership slip into chaos. At closing time, Marcus stood in the showroom, watching the employees filter out, all heading home for the night. His gut told him that the dealership was teetering on the edge. The changes he had initiated were shaking things up, but if Alan wasn't going to follow through, it was only a matter of time before the whole operation fell apart. As Marcus was about to head out, his phone buzzed with another message from Karen. We've got a problem. Alan's team is pushing back. Some are talking about quitting if things don't change. We need to act fast. Marcus stared at the screen for a moment, his heart sinking. This was exactly what he had feared. The resistance wasn't just coming from Alan, it was spreading. It wasn't just about one manager anymore. This was a full-blown rebellion against the changes Marcus had put in motion. He took a deep breath. There was no turning back now. He had to make the call. The following day, Marcus was ready. As the dealership opened for business, he called a mandatory meeting with all the department heads, including Alan. The showroom was bustling with the usual morning traffic, but Marcus knew this meeting would be different. He wasn't just about to talk. He was going to make the tough decisions that had to be made. He stood in front of the assembled managers, looking each of them in the eye. This isn't working, he said, his voice carrying through the room. Alan, I've given you multiple chances, but your team is still resisting the changes. We can't keep pretending everything is fine when it's clearly not. Alan's face reddened, and he opened his mouth to protest, but Marcus held up a hand. It's over. I'm making changes, and if you can't be part of them, then it's time for you to go. Alan froze, his expression a mixture of disbelief and anger. But Marcus was resolute. This wasn't personal. It was business. He had waited long enough. I'm giving you a final chance to show me you can lead. If you can't bring your team in line, I'll have no choice but to let you go. I'm not here to play games anymore. The room was silent. No one spoke. Everyone seemed to be waiting for Alan's response. Alan swallowed hard, looking at Marcus, then at the other managers. He looked defeated, but something in his eyes told Marcus that Alan wasn't ready to give up yet. I'll do it, Alan said, his voice steady but strained. I'll fix it. But if I don't, I'll leave. Marcus nodded. Good. Now let's get to work. It was the beginning of the end for Alan, but it was also the beginning of something much bigger for Marcus. The question was no longer if the changes would work, but if Alan would be able to keep up with them. The following days were an uneasy calm. Marcus kept his distance, observing from the sidelines as Alan worked tirelessly to turn things around. But it wasn't enough. The cracks were beginning to show. Marcus could see that Alan, for all his efforts, wasn't truly connecting with his team. The employees were still resisting, still pushing back against the changes Marcus had outlined. The atmosphere in the showroom was tense, and the staff had started to divide into two camps. Those who supported the new vision and those who were loyal to Alan and his old ways. Alan's efforts to improve morale were half-hearted at best. He held meetings, spoke about the importance of customer service, and tried to offer pep talks to the salespeople. But none of it had the desired effect. His team wasn't responding to him the way he wanted. Marcus knew it wasn't just about words anymore. Action spoke louder than anything, and Alan wasn't delivering. It was Tuesday morning when Marcus walked into the dealership to find Alan in the middle of yet another sales meeting. This time, the energy in the room was different. There was no enthusiasm, no buzz. The salespeople were sitting with arms crossed, their faces unreadable. Alan, standing at the front, was rambling on about staying positive and working together as a team, but his voice lacked conviction. Marcus knew something had to change, and fast. The dealership couldn't afford to keep running in place while Alan fumbled through his role. He stepped into the meeting room, interrupting Alan mid-sentence. All eyes turned toward him. "Alan," Marcus said, his tone sharp, "I need to speak with you. Now." Alan's face flushed, but he didn't argue. He excused himself from the meeting and followed Marcus into his office. Marcus shut the door behind them. "What's going on, Alan?" His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "I've been watching you, and you're not getting the results I need. This team is fractured, and it's because you're not leading them properly. The energy in this place is dead, and you're the one who's supposed to change that." Alan looked down at the floor, visibly deflated. "I'm trying, Marcus. I swear I am. But I can't force people to buy into the changes. I can't make them believe in what we're doing here if they don't want to." Marcus leaned against his desk, crossing his arms. "That's where you're wrong. It's not about convincing them. It's about leading by example. It's about showing them the value in these changes and getting them on board through your actions, not your words. If you can't do that, Alan, then I'm going to have to make a tough decision." Alan's head snapped up. "What do you mean?" Marcus took a deep breath. "I've given you every opportunity to prove yourself, but it's clear that your team is looking to someone else for leadership. It's not working with you in charge." There was a long pause, the weight of Marcus's words settling in the room like a heavy fog. Alan's face grew pale, and Marcus could see the panic starting to rise in his eyes. "What are you saying?" Alan asked quietly. "I'm saying that if you can't get your team under control, if you can't turn this place around, I'll have to let you go. It's as simple as that." Alan took a step back, his shoulders slumping. "I'm not ready to walk away, Marcus. I've been here for years. Marcus cut him off. "It's not about how long you've been here. It's about results. I don't have time for sentimentality, Alan. I can't let personal loyalty or history get in the way of what's best for the dealership." Alan stood frozen, his eyes glazed with the kind of uncertainty that only came when someone realized they were about to lose everything. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "I understand. I'll get it together. I won't let you down." Marcus didn't respond. He simply nodded and left the office, his mind already turning to the next steps. He wasn't sure if Alan could turn things around, but he didn't have time to waste on uncertainty. He needed results, and he needed them fast. As the day went on, Marcus watched Alan more closely. He could see the effort in his manager's eyes, the way he spoke more urgently with the sales team, the way he tried to crack jokes to lighten the mood. But it wasn't enough. The atmosphere in the dealership remained tense, and Marcus could tell that even though Alan was trying to make things right, it wasn't going to be enough to salvage his position. The damage had been done. Late in the afternoon, just as Marcus was about to leave for the day, Karen knocked on his office door. "Got a minute?" she asked, stepping inside. "Of course. What's going on?" Karen hesitated for a moment before speaking. "It's about Alan. The staff's losing faith in him. He's trying, but there's a real division in the team now. People are starting to question his leadership, and I'm hearing some serious concerns from the sales floor." Marcus frowned. "I figured as much. I've been keeping an eye on him, and it's not working. He's not leading the way we need him to." Karen sat down, clearly uneasy. "I don't want to say this, but I think it might be time to move on from Alan. The longer we wait, the more the divide widens. He's not just losing control of the team. He's losing control of the atmosphere. People aren't motivated anymore, and that's starting to affect sales." Marcus took a deep breath. He had known this was coming, but hearing it from Karen made it more real. "I was hoping it wouldn't come to this, but you're right. It's not working. I'm going to have to let him go." Karen nodded. "I agree, but just be prepared. This could cause a rift. People might not be happy with your decision." Marcus sat back in his chair, his fingers tapping the desk. I've already given Alan every opportunity. I can't keep waiting for things to improve if they're not. It's time for a change. The next morning, Marcus called Alan into his office again. This time, Alan didn't hesitate. He came in quietly, sitting down without waiting for an invitation. "Alan," Marcus began, his voice as steady as he could manage, "I've given you every chance to turn things around, but the situation is no longer manageable. You're not able to get the results we need, and the division among the team is growing. I can't let this go on any longer." Alan's eyes widened, and his mouth opened as if he were about to speak, but no words came out. He stared at Marcus for a long moment, then dropped his gaze, his shoulders sagging. "I've made up my mind, Alan," Marcus continued. "I'm letting you go. I wish it didn't come to this, but the dealership needs someone who can lead, someone who can unite the team and get results." There was a long silence. Alan looked like he wanted to protest, to argue, but he simply nodded slowly. "I understand, Marcus." Marcus stood up, holding out a hand. "I'll make sure you get what you're owed. I wish you the best moving forward." Alan stood as well, shaking Marcus's hand with a stiff grip. There was no warmth in the gesture, only the finality of an ending. As Alan left the office, Marcus leaned back in his chair, the weight of the decision heavy on his chest. This was it. The dealership was his, now more than ever. But what came next? What would it take to restore the team's faith and bring the atmosphere back to life? Marcus wasn't sure, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to back down. He had a vision, and it was time to see it through, no matter what it cost. Just as Marcus was about to leave for the day, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Karen. "Word's already spreading. Some of the staff are unhappy, but others are relieved. We need to keep an eye on the reactions and be ready for any fallout." Marcus stared at the message for a moment, then sighed. The next phase had begun, but no matter what came next, he was ready. The hard decisions were just beginning. The fallout from Alan's departure didn't take long to arrive. By the time Marcus walked into the dealership the following morning, the air was thick with whispers. The mood was heavier than it had been even before he made his decision to fire Alan. Staff members were huddled in groups, speaking in low voices, casting glances toward the management office. Marcus could sense the unease. It was as if a line had been drawn in the sand. Alan had been a fixture at the dealership for years. He wasn't just a manager. He had been a friend to many, a mentor to others. And now he was gone. In his place stood Marcus, someone who for some was still too new, too unfamiliar, and too willing to make the tough decisions. But Marcus had no time for second-guessing. He couldn't afford to look back. He had a business to run and a team to manage. The first person to approach him that morning was Karen. She walked into his office with a concerned expression, her usual professionalism marred by the tension in her shoulders. "How's the floor?" Marcus asked, even before she sat down. "It's a mess," she said bluntly. "A lot of people are upset, Marcus. Some are relieved, but others, well, they feel like you betrayed Alan. A few people are even talking about leaving." Marcus pinched the bridge of his nose, a familiar pressure building behind his eyes. He had anticipated this, but it still stung. "I knew there'd be some fallout. I didn't make this decision lightly." "I know," Karen said, pacing around the office. "But that doesn't change the fact that a lot of people are going to need time to adjust. Some are asking why they weren't consulted before you made this move." Marcus sat back in his chair. He had seen this coming. Alan's supporters weren't just going to vanish overnight. The decision had been necessary, but it was going to cost him. "What do you think we should do?" he asked, his tone calm but laced with the exhaustion he was feeling. Karen paused, considering her response. "We need to hold a meeting," addressed the team. "They need to hear from you directly, to understand why this had to happen. If we don't, rumors will spread, and the tension will just build." Marcus nodded. He wasn't sure he was ready for that kind of confrontation, but Karen was right. He needed to take control of the narrative before it spun out of control. By mid-morning, Marcus called an emergency all-staff meeting. He stood in front of the group in the showroom, all eyes on him, some filled with curiosity, others with distrust. The room was quieter than usual, with no jovial chatter or the usual clinking of coffee cups. The absence of Alan's presence was palpable, and everyone knew that whatever happened next would set the tone for the days to come. Marcus cleared his throat before speaking. "I know there are a lot of questions right now, and I want to address those head-on. First, let me say that firing Alan wasn't a decision I made lightly. He's been a part of this dealership for years, and I respect his contributions. But the truth is, this dealership needs to move in a new direction. We need leadership that can bring us together, not tear us apart." The room shifted uneasily as Marcus continued. "I understand that not everyone is happy with my decision. Some of you have worked with Alan for years, and I respect the loyalty you have for him. But this business isn't about one person. It's about all of us working together toward a common goal: to provide the best service we can to our customers, to push for excellence every day, and to make this dealership a place we can all be proud of." He paused, scanning the room, making sure everyone was following him. "I'm not asking for blind loyalty. What I'm asking for is commitment. I'm asking for everyone here to be part of this team, to buy into the vision, and to show up every day ready to give their best. If you can't do that, if you can't get behind the changes we're making, then maybe this isn't the right place for you." The silence in the room grew thicker, but Marcus held his ground. "I'm not here to be liked," he continued. "I'm here to make sure this dealership survives, thrives, and continues to grow. And that means making tough calls when necessary. Alan's leadership wasn't working. That's why I had to let him go." Karen was standing near the back of the room, her arms crossed, watching the employees closely. Marcus could tell she was ready to step in if needed, but she'd also trusted that he had control of the situation. "For those of you who have doubts, who are unsure about where we go from here, let me be clear. The changes I'm making are for the betterment of everyone. This isn't just about me. This is about all of us moving forward together. So if you have questions, concerns, or if you're not sure about the direction we're headed, I'm happy to sit down with you. But I need to know that everyone here is on board." There was a long, heavy pause. Marcus could feel the weight of the room's uncertainty pressing down on him. He knew that not everyone would accept his vision, but he couldn't afford to let that stop him. Finally, a voice spoke from the back of the room. "What about the people who supported Alan? Are we just supposed to forget everything he did for us?" Marcus turned to see a familiar face: Jared, one of the top salespeople who had been with Alan through thick and thin. His arms were crossed in defiance, and his eyes held a mixture of frustration and disbelief. "I'm not asking anyone to forget," Marcus replied evenly. "Alan did a lot of good things for this dealership, but we can't move forward by holding on to the past. If you want to be part of this team, you need to move forward with us." Jared opened his mouth as if to argue, but he didn't. Instead, he stood silently, glaring at Marcus, before finally shaking his head and walking out of the meeting. The tension in the room deepened. It was clear that some employees weren't ready to accept the change. Marcus could feel the divide, and he knew that this was just the beginning. He had expected some fallout, but this felt different. This wasn't just about one manager anymore. This was about the future of the entire dealership, and some people weren't ready to let go of the past. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Marcus spent most of it in his office, fielding calls and trying to put out fires. Jared wasn't the only one upset. A few others had approached him privately, expressing their dissatisfaction, and a couple of employees had even threatened to quit if things didn't change back. But Marcus wasn't backing down. He had made his decision, and now it was time to prove that he was the right person for the job. He couldn't afford to show weakness, not now. That evening, just as Marcus was finishing up paperwork, Karen came into his office. "We've got a situation," she said, her face serious. "Jared and a few of his supporters have gone to the press. They're saying you fired Alan unfairly and that it's causing chaos at the dealership." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He had known that Jared wouldn't go quietly, but he hadn't expected this. The press? That was a whole new level of trouble. How bad is it? Marcus asked, leaning forward. Bad enough, Karen replied. They're calling it a power struggle at the dealership, and there's a story up online about how the employees are divided. It's getting some traction. Marcus stood up, pacing the room. This is exactly what I didn't want to happen. We need to get ahead of this before it spirals out of control. Do you think we can meet with the press tomorrow? Karen hesitated. We could, but we'll need to be careful. If we do this wrong, it could make things worse. Marcus nodded. I don't have a choice. Let's do it. The storm was only just beginning, and Marcus knew he needed to be ready for whatever came next. The dealership's future was at stake, and he was determined to see it through. The next morning, Marcus woke up to a barrage of phone calls and text messages. The story about Alan's firing had gone viral faster than he had anticipated. News outlets, local and national, were running the headline, "Dealership in turmoil. Manager fired, employees divided." The online chatter was filled with a mix of opinions. Some were supportive of Marcus, but many others were outraged by the firing of a longtime employee. The comment sections were flooded with speculation and anger. People were asking, was Marcus really the right person to lead the dealership, or was he just another corporate outsider? Marcus tried to block out the noise, but it was impossible. He had become the target of public scrutiny. The dealership's reputation was on the line. A few of the larger news organizations were even calling for interviews, hoping to get a soundbite from Marcus about the scandal. By the time he arrived at the dealership, the atmosphere was even more tense than the day before. Employees were walking around in groups, talking in hushed tones. Some were avoiding eye contact, while others shot him resentful glares. Even those who had been loyal to Alan were finding it difficult to hide their disappointment. Karen was waiting for him in his office when he arrived. She was already on the phone, but as soon as she saw Marcus walk in, she put the call on hold. I think we need to act fast, she said, her expression grave. The media's all over this, and we're not controlling the narrative. People are already forming opinions, and it's not good for us. Some of the local reporters are pushing hard for an interview, and they won't back down. Marcus leaned against his desk, trying to process everything at once. What's the best way to handle this? Karen paused, biting her lip. We need to address this head-on, but we have to be careful. If we don't show the public we're united, they'll eat us alive. They're looking for a story, and we can't give them one unless it's the one we control. The worst thing we can do right now is stay silent. Marcus knew she was right. The longer he waited, the more the story would spin out of control. He had to show everyone, his employees, the public, and the media, that he had a clear vision for the future, one that was not clouded by personal drama. I'll do the interview, Marcus said decisively. Get in touch with the reporters and set it up. We'll address everything, Alan's firing, the changes I've made, and where we go from here. But I want it to be clear that this dealership's future is non-negotiable. We have a business to run, and we're going to keep moving forward. Karen nodded, looking somewhat relieved. I'll handle the details. But remember, Marcus, this isn't just about you and the dealership. You're going to have to address the employees too. If you don't get them on your side first, the media won't care how good your answers are. They'll just see you as the villain. Marcus grimaced. Yeah, I know. But what can I do? I've made my choice. I'm not going to apologize for it. Karen gave him a sympathetic look. I understand. But you've got to show the staff that you're the one who's leading them, not just an outsider making all the decisions. With that, Marcus took a deep breath and prepared for the challenge ahead. He needed to act quickly, but he also had to be strategic. It was clear that the next few days would determine not only the fate of his leadership, but also the future of the dealership. The press conference was scheduled for later that afternoon. By the time Marcus stepped onto the stage in front of a small crowd of reporters, his nerves were starting to settle. He had spoken to Karen about the key points he needed to hit during the interview. He would acknowledge Alan's contribution to the dealership, But he would also explain why his decision had been necessary for the dealership's future. It was important to keep the message clear and not get sidetracked by emotion or personal attacks. The reporters were ready with their cameras, notebooks, and microphones, eager to capture every word Marcus said. As soon as he stood at the podium, the questions began firing off. "Mr. Cross, why did you decide to fire Alan so suddenly? Was there any prior warning? Do you think this decision will damage the dealership's reputation? Why didn't you consult the staff before making this decision?" Marcus took a deep breath and responded, his voice calm but firm. "First, I want to make one thing clear. Alan has been an important part of this dealership for years. His leadership was invaluable in many ways, and I respect the work he put in. However, after careful consideration, I made the decision to let him go because I believe that in order to move this dealership forward, we need a new approach." He paused, letting the words sink in. The industry is changing. Customer expectations are higher than ever. In order to compete, we need to adapt, and we need a leader who can bring the team together, unite them with a shared vision, and drive us toward success. That's what I'm here to do. A reporter raised his hand. "But you've heard the backlash, right? Many employees are upset. Some have even threatened to quit. Don't you think that this move could hurt morale and hurt sales?" Marcus nodded, acknowledging the concern. "I understand that this decision has caused some unease. I'm not blind to the fact that there are employees who are upset. Change is never easy. But let me be clear, this dealership isn't about one person. It's about the team as a whole. I'm committed to working with everyone here to make this a place where we can all thrive." He looked around at the reporters, his eyes steady. "The changes I'm making are necessary for the long-term success of the dealership. I know it's hard, and I know there are people who aren't happy right now. But this is the direction we need to take, and I won't back down from it." One of the reporters pressed further. "What about those who don't agree with your leadership style? What if more employees decide to leave?" Marcus met her gaze without flinching. "If people can't get behind the vision I have for this dealership, then maybe this isn't the right place for them. But for those who are willing to work with me, I promise we will build a strong, unified team. One that's focused on moving forward and providing the best service to our customers." The questions continued, but Marcus stuck to his message, refusing to be baited into a personal attack or to get sidetracked by emotions. This wasn't about Alan anymore. This was about the future, about leading the dealership towards success, no matter the cost. When the press conference ended, Marcus felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. He had said what needed to be said, but now the real work began. He had to win over the team, prove that he was the right leader, and show them that change was a necessary part of progress. As he walked back into the dealership, Karen caught his eye. She gave him a small, approving nod, but even she could tell that the storm wasn't over yet. The next few hours were a blur of tense interactions with staff. Some employees came to him to offer support, while others expressed their frustration or disappointment. It was clear that the rift between Alan's supporters and Marcus's supporters was growing, and there was no quick way to mend it. By late afternoon, Marcus had a sinking feeling in his stomach. He had expected resistance, but now that it was here, it was more intense than he had anticipated. As he looked around the dealership, he couldn't help but wonder, would he be able to bring the team back together? Or had he made a decision that would cost him everything? And then, as he walked toward the back office, his phone buzzed with another text message from Karen. "We've got a new problem. Jared's organizing a walkout. He's rallying employees to leave the dealership if we don't reverse the firing." Marcus's stomach twisted. He had known this wouldn't be easy. He had to face the reality of what that could mean. Let it happen. If they leave, we'll move forward with those who want to stay. Karen hesitated for a moment before responding. "Are you sure? Because once this goes public, it's going to be hard to recover." Marcus took a deep breath. "I've come too far to back down now." A few minutes later, Jared and the others were still gathered in the break room. Marcus walked back over to the group, his eyes steady. "I won't change my mind, Jared," he said firmly. "If you and your supporters want to walk, that's your choice. But this dealership will move forward, whether you stay or not." Jared didn't say anything at first. He just stared at Marcus for a long moment. Then he turned to the group, his face hardened. "You heard the man. If you're with me, we walk." A tense silence filled the room as the employees exchanged glances. It was clear that some were already leaning toward staying, while others were still undecided. The mood was fragile. Finally, one by one, the employees began to leave. Jared led the charge, walking out with a handful of others in tow. As they filed out the door, Marcus watched, his heart sinking with every step they took. This wasn't just a walkout. It was a statement, and it was one that would be hard to undo. As the last of them exited, Karen joined him, her face a mix of worry and resolve. "This is bad, Marcus. Really bad." Marcus stood there, watching the empty space where his team had once gathered, his stomach in knots. He knew this wasn't just a personal loss. It was a business loss. The dealership would have to find a way to recover, and fast. But then as he turned to head back inside, he noticed something. Some of the employees who had been quiet throughout the ordeal, those who hadn't walked out, were still standing there waiting. They hadn't left. They hadn't turned their backs on him. It wasn't much, but it was something. As Marcus walked toward them, he felt the smallest flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could salvage this. Maybe the dealership wasn't done yet. But with the press waiting outside, the fallout already spreading, and the team divided, he knew the real battle was just beginning.